Wilson. I'm a professor at the University of Waterloo, where I teach Buddhist studies, East Asian studies, and related topics. I'm also a minister's assistant here at the Toronto Temple. I have that great privilege. And what I'm talking about tonight, I thought we'd kick this off with talk about compassion. I solicited some ideas on the Temple Facebook page, and I got some good suggestions. I've kept them in a file, and I will try to get back to as many of those as I can over the course of the lectures during this year. But in looking for a theme, I noticed that a number of them seem to be related to issues around compassion in Buddhism in some manner. For example, there was someone who asked me, why aren't all Buddhists vegans? Vegans are sort of hardcore vegetarians. So why aren't all Buddhists hardcore vegetarians, and so on? I thought, well, that's a good question. It's a very specific question. I probably won't take an entire hour to tell you why Buddhists aren't all vegans. But the larger issue there that I think the person is pointing towards is she understands vegetarianism to be a manifestation of compassion, having compassion towards animals, so not wishing to see them slaughtered and so on. And she's associating compassion with the Buddhist tradition. So in that case, why aren't all Buddhists being compassionate? Why aren't they all just eating lettuce all day long, right? That's, I think, what she's sort of getting at there. So I thought, well, let's back it up a bit. We can address that question. But let's talk in general about the role of compassion in the Buddhist tradition, and then we'll see what various issues this takes us to. So, don't worry, I'm going to spare you. There will not be a lecture on vegetarianism tonight. I do happen to be a vegetarian, and I was a vegan for 6 years, but I'm going to keep that to myself rather than imposing it upon you. So, let's start at the beginning. I have a handout here. I hope you all got this. What this is an outline of what I'm intending to speak about tonight. That way, if I go off script, you're going to know it. So I guess maybe I didn't do myself any favors with this. But I just thought, let's start at the beginning. Let's handle a number of questions that are related to this idea of compassion in the Buddhist tradition. Obviously, I think the best starting point is just to define this sort of thing. Compassion. What is this compassion? This is a word everyone has heard of, I'm sure. We use it. We probably think of compassion as a valuable sort of thing to have. But let's define it specifically. First of all, this word compassion. This is an English word, so it's not a word that originally comes to us from any of the languages that Buddhism has historically been preserved or taught in. I guess maybe I should say historically. After all, Buddhism has been taught in English in some fashion since late in the 19th century. And, we've had temples here in Canada since 1905. But anyways, I'm thinking here of the classical languages of Sanskrit and Pali, the two Indian languages, which are sort of the original languages of Buddhism, two very closely related languages, almost in some ways dialects almost of a single common Indic earlier language. And then the further languages that Buddhism was taught in as it moved out of India across Asia to many different cultures. This is especially Chinese and Tibetan became also canonical languages. And then we have languages such as Japanese, Thai, and so on, further languages that this has been taught in for a long, long time. But what about compassion? This is our good English word here. Well, like a lot of words in English, it's not even originally English if we look at it here, right? Compassion. This is coming from Latin roots. There's two different Latin root words that are being put together and used to express this term in English. What are they? Well, calm meaning with, and passion. What does passion mean? And we might think, oh, passion means love or having a tumultuous affair or something, or feeling energized or something like that. What does passion actually mean in Latin? It means suffering. This is why people talk about the passion of the Christ. They don't mean like Jesus' great love affair or something like that. They mean the suffering of Jesus in that sort of sense. And of course, Latin and Christianity, two phenomena that have been closely associated with each other. So it's not that surprising that a word like compassion would have itself a religiously connected sort of root to it there. So compassion means literally with suffering. With suffering. The important thing to understand about the word compassion is it's with the suffering of others. That's what is implied when you actually look at it in the Latin. With the suffering of others, being with the suffering of others, or acknowledging the suffering of others, not overlooking it, but paying attention to it. So this is where this word compassion comes from. I looked it up in the dictionary also to give us a sort of technical definition. Here's what I got. Quote, a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate that suffering. So a feeling of sympathy and sorrow because someone has had misfortune, and a second part to it, a desire to alleviate that suffering. I was very impressed actually with this definition. This is just straight out of a standard dictionary. So this is defining the English sort of term here. This is extremely close to the traditional Buddhist understanding of this sort of thing. So I was impressed that the same sort of concept is operating in both cultural systems. That means that back when we were working to move Buddhism originally from Asian languages, looking for cognate words in English that we could try to use that would express these terms, however they hit upon this word compassion to translate the Asian words, they did a really good job. This really is very close to the correct understanding. Well, what about those originally Buddhist words then? What are they then? Just so that we know what they are. Well, the word in Sanskrit is karuna. Karuna. K-A-R-U-N-A. Karuna. Kind of sounds Hawaiian to me almost, like the big kahuna or something. If you got the big karuna, that would be like the Buddha or something like that, right? Big kahuna. So, karuna is the word in Sanskrit and in Pali. It's the same. A lot of times the words are the same or very similar in those two canonical languages. So karuna is the Indian Buddhist word for compassion. And then I thought, well, we ought to know the Japanese one as well, obviously, since that's the language that this tradition has most strongly come down to us in. The word in Japanese is jihi, J-I-H-I. I'm going to write it down. Jihi. And jihi is made up of characters, two different characters, Chinese characters. One of them is the character for grieving, and the other is the character for showing mercy. So this is kind of an interesting sort of thing too. This, of course, jihi is how we say it in Japanese. Those characters, those are the ones they use in Chinese, and so we use those characters to say the word jihi if we're writing in Japanese. So this is an earlier Chinese understanding that the way to translate karuna into that language system was to focus on the fact that there's grieving and showing mercy. So it's grieving, feeling grief or feeling sorrow at the fact that others are having misfortune, again, and showing mercy. So trying to bestow some benevolence, trying to help them in their situations. So this again, I think is still pretty close to that sense of compassion that we were talking about before. All right, so that's just a technical definition of this sort of thing. Well, what are we supposed to do with this in that case? Who are we supposed to have compassion for, according to the Buddhist tradition? Because compassion is a feeling, it's an attitude, and it is relational, always. You don't just have compassion in the abstract. You know, you're not really just walking around, I'm full of compassion today. Compassion really is usually understood as being directed. You can have a general feeling of concern for the welfare of the world or for people or something like that. Even that, though, there's still an object there, people in the abstract. But usually compassion is directed. There's a relationship there. So who should we have that feeling towards? Well, in the Buddhist tradition, it's really all people. We should have the feeling of compassion for everyone. Whether or not we like them or don't like them, we should feel some compassion towards them. Whether they're good to us or mistreat us, we should still try to feel some compassion towards them. I'm boiling down 2,500 years worth of various commentaries by people in a million different languages, so bear with me here. But this is the basic essence of what we're talking about here. People in different traditions affirm that compassion is not something that you direct only towards your loved ones or only towards people in your clan or tribe or family or whatever this may be, or only towards people in your nation, or only towards people in your religion or something like that. Compassion is something that is for everyone, ideally. Certainly Buddhists and Bodhisattvas feel compassion towards everyone, no matter how good or how bad they are. This is very important. Are we able to feel that level of compassion? No, not as foolish sentient beings right now, but maybe it's a goal. It's a role model that can help us, that can guide us in our lives. The thing with Buddhist compassion, though, that I find interesting is that it's not just for all people. We find this in other religious systems too. If we look to Christianity, what are we told there? Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, maybe this might have originally had some sense of like, love your neighbor. This guy lives next door, around you, the people around you, be good to the people in your community or something. But certainly this has taken on the idea in Christianity that we should have love towards everyone. Christians say, well, who is not my neighbor? All people really are my neighbors, they would say. Some people, anyways, many people. So this is also a sense of having a sense of love or possibly compassion for all people. But in the Christian tradition, typically it does stop there. Whereas in the Buddhist tradition, you're only getting started at this point. Buddhism wants to expand the sense of compassion out from just other people. In a way, even if they're bad people, we still relate to other human beings quite easily. But Buddhism suggests that compassion is something that should be shown for all living beings. So this is a much wider sense of compassion. All living things, all sentient beings. So this includes animals, all sorts of animals. Now I'm getting dangerously close back towards that vegetarian thing. We'll not go there, don't worry. That's not this lecture. So every living thing around here we might encounter. Already we've got a question or answer.
Plants are living things, are they not?
Plants are living things, are they not? Says my Mars advocate here. Okay, very good. Okay, all right. This is something. I'm so afraid I'm going to turn this into a vegetarian talk because I hear this very thing. I really don't actually want to do this, but I'll digress a little bit. Some of you know that while I've been living in Canada for a number of years now, my family is originally from the American South. They're a particular people. Most of my people are Texans, as a matter of fact. They are a particular type of Southerner. Please extend your compassion to them. They are meat eaters and meat lovers, among other things. So when I, told them, I'm going to go vegetarian, this was back when I was at university, they said things like, well, cows eat plants too, So, as if that made a cow a plant somehow, okay? Or they would try the other thing, well, a plant is alive too, so that's true. So are people. So does that make it okay to eat people? It's like we have to draw the line somewhere, right? But the question is, well, plants are living things too. What do we do with this in terms of our sense of compassion? Well, as a matter of fact, in the Japanese tradition at least, plants are often included in this category of sentient beings. Does this mean that the Japanese don't eat plants? No. They eat a lot of fish and a lot of other meat too. So while they're included within the sphere of compassion, we have to note that people's real practices sometimes differ. But actually, this is an interpretation that became common in Eastern Asia. We certainly see it strongly in the Japanese tradition, and we see it also to some extent in China, where the idea originated, and also in Korea and Vietnam. That it's not just sentient beings, but all living things, including plants, that they all are to be included in the idea of compassion. Why should we have compassion for them? Well, they can suffer, potentially, and they can have life and have that life taken away from them or have that life abused. So from people through animals, through plants, we should have compassion for them. Of course, the thing is, we're just talking about even the visible world of sentient beings or living beings here. In traditional Buddhist cosmology, again, we're still just at the tip of the iceberg here. Buddhist cosmology imagines an entire universe populated with all sorts of say, less tangible living things, such as devas, which we might translate as deities or gods in English. All sorts of asuras, these are sort of like titans or demigods or something like that. Ghosts, including hungry ghosts, they are also seen as living beings. People who are reborn in the temporary hell realms and things like that. So there's a whole sort of cosmos of living beings in the traditional Buddhist imagination, all of whom should be objects of your compassion. I find this to be quite an interesting aspect of Buddhism that does separate it from some other religious traditions. For example, the idea of having compassion for people stuck in the purgatorial hell realms. There are some traditions of Christianity and Islam who would say that people who are in the hells are there by their own actions. You can write them off this way. Buddhism never does this. Beings who are in the hell realms are never written off in Buddhism. Quite the opposite. There are Buddhism bodhisattvas who specifically dedicate themselves to traveling there and suffering along with them in order to help them and try to free them from those sort of situations. I find that indicates sort of the width of compassion in the Buddhist tradition. On the other hand, you also have beings in the heavens, according to Buddhist cosmology, and they too, we're told, should be objects of your compassion. That's kind of interesting, because usually you're not supposed to have like compassion for God or angels or something like that. But they don't need it; they're doing great. Except that in the Buddhist tradition, it's understood that even they suffer as well. Their lives are better than ours, better than mine. I won't speak to yours, but typically better than human lives. But nonetheless, because they are alive, they do suffer. Things change for them, and even gods don't like it when things change. They encounter some suffering there. And even gods are actually mortal. Angels are mortal. In the Buddhist understanding, someday their lives will weaken. They will experience aging, sickness, and the agonies of death, and then be reborn in some other form. So there's not a single type of life anywhere, seen or unseen, which is left out of the sphere of compassion, according to the Buddhist commentarial literature here. So how about plants? Well, they're in there too. Absolutely. Actually, if we want to be really technical, a lot of Japanese writers have a tendency to be, let's say, hyperbolic with their compassion. Can one be hyperbolic with compassion? Such that they'll take it all the way. They'll talk about how even stones and roof tiles have Buddha nature, and so they're living in some sense, and they have to be included in this sort of thing. I don't think that these people literally mean, oh, you should, go find a rock and pet it and say, what a nice little rock, I have compassion for you, and think that you'll be reborn as a rock. No, they mean something a little different with that. That's neither here nor there. Maybe that'll be a future talk. What is the role of rocks in the Buddhist tradition? Anyways, let me move on to my next question. Okay, so we know what compassion is now, what it means in the Buddhist tradition, and who we're supposed to have compassion for. Quick answer, compassion is feeling bad for all the sufferings that people have, wishing to do something about it, and expressing it for all living beings. So, now I've got a nice technical term on your sheet for you. How does this relate to the 4 Brahma Viharas? Anybody here know what the 4 Brahma Viharas are? Has anyone heard of these before? Don't worry, there's no quiz here. Okay, all right. So great, I've got you stumped. That means I've got something to say in that case. Compassion is part of a set of 4 related attitudes called the 4 Brahma Viharas, which Buddhists are implored to cultivate. These are teachings that go back apparently to the Buddha Shakyamuni himself. We have sermons of his that describe these 4 Brahma Viharas, describe them in quite some detail, and discuss how to cultivate them. They result even in certain sort of mental states or meditative states that embody these 4 Brahma Viharas. And these are things that high-level monks, as well as lay people, were enjoying to sort of cultivate. Well, what are they? First of all, what is this word Brahma Vihara? I'll define it. Although, I see a hand here. Go ahead.
I think just by coincidence, read a chapter in your book today about, I may be wrong,
Okay.
but is it sincerity, trust, humility, and compassion?
A very good guess. They're actually another set of 4 things. But they serve a similar sort of function. So we're talking there, you're talking about 4 sort of key attitudes, which are related to actions as well, and are very relational also. Being trusting, being compassionate, being sincere, these sort of things. This is the thing about Buddhism. It's full of lists of numbers. So if I bring up the 4 things in some other language you haven't heard of, it's absolutely good try to guess for these things. But I emphasize this with my students, actually. So there's actually whole sections of the Buddhist canon that are divided just by the numbers. So the lists of the ones, the 1 thing, 1 Buddha, or the 2s, the 2 things, the 3 things, the 3 jewels, the 4 things, 4 truths, 4 Brahmaviharas, the 8 things, the 37 things, the 42 things, the 52 things, the 108 things, the 84,000 things, it goes on and on and on like this. There's actually a reason for this. Buddhists were not just pedantic back in the old days. If you have these numbered lists, it's easier to remember. These things come to us written down. We're used to Buddhism as a literate religion, right? But for the first several centuries, these were oral teachings that were passed from master to disciple. And how do you remember? You can remember a list much better than remember everything about compassion. That doesn't help you. Remember these 4 things about compassion. Aha! Now I know there must be 4 things. I can only think of 3. I know there must be another one. I'll keep working. Then I'll get it. Okay? So this was a very smart sort of thing. The Buddhist scriptures were not written down for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is not because the Indians were not illiterate people. It's the other way around. Scriptures were so holy that they were not written down. They were kept as living words passed from person to person. And therefore, they took great pains to try to memorize them and keep them as accurately transmitted from person to person in this way. Writing was actually for mundane, everyday things. Write a grocery list and go out with it, and then throw it away when you're done. Something important like scriptures, memorize it, internalize it, be able to speak it to anyone, anywhere, not like, oh, I'd love to teach you Buddhism today, but I forgot my book. Let's wait till I get my notepad at home. No. You've got it inside of you, so you can bring it out in that way. This is why they spent centuries before they wrote these sort of things down. So, lots of lists. What are these 4 Brahmaviharas? Brahmavihara is a word, this has 2 words to it, Brahma and Vihara. Okay? Basically, they mean divine dwellings. Brahma is a word for a deity, and Vihara means a dwelling place. That's why, for example, some of the Theravada Buddhist temples around here in Toronto are called viharas. That's because they're dwelling places of monks. So you get like Toronto Buddhist Vihara, that's because there's monks living there. So these are the divine dwellings, or divine abodes. What it means is that people who are dwelling in these 4 states, these are states of mind, if you're dwelling in this state, then you're noble, like a god, like a deity, like a deva. That's why they call these the Brahmaviharas. In Japanese, these are the Shimuryoshi, meaning the 4 unlimited states of the mind and heart. So taking a slightly different tack to it. So what are these 4? Let me take a drink, I'll tell you. Keep you in suspense for a moment. Okay. Number 1, big surprise. Karuna, compassion. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up in this lecture. Okay? What is this? We know that this is acknowledging others' pain, the pain that they have felt or are feeling, and it means hoping that it will diminish. That's in its basic sense. And we take it further, of course, we may try to help it diminish. But feeling bad that others have felt pain, and hoping that pain will decrease in the future. So this is thinking to the present or to the past, and then with a hope for the future. The next one of the Brahmaviharas is mudita. Mudita. This is sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy. What this means is to to recognize the happiness that others have and hope that it will increase in the future. There's a tendency to think of Buddhism as kind of a killjoy, kind of a bummed out religion. We think of, like starting with the Four Noble Truths. What's the first most important thing the Buddha said? Not like, you all have Buddha nature, or life is great, or we'll all go to the Pure Land, or let's spread love all over the world. So like, first noble truth is like, life is full of suffering, dum dum dum, right? Okay. Because of this, there's been a stereotype that Buddhists are all about suffering, that they're all kind of pessimistic or something like that. Actually, the way I tend to think of this is that Buddhists are very realistic. They start with the fact that there's suffering in all our lives, but then what are the rest of the noble truths? The next one is why it happens. The next one after that is hopeful, saying that there's a way to get around it, and then they give you the actual method here. So it's just realistic. It says that we're not perfectly off right now, but there's a way to improve things for us. So, same sort of thing. They start with the idea, people suffer, and we feel bad for their suffering. But then, in the next step, they move on to sympathetic joy. People also have happiness in their lives. Buddha directly acknowledges that. And with this feeling of mudita, we wish their happiness to increase in the future. So these are sort of twin things. Compassion for the suffering others have had, sympathetic joy at the fact that they've had happiness too. Compassionate wish for their suffering to decrease, joyful hope that their happiness will increase in the future. These are like just two sides of the same coin here. Karuna and mudita. Then there's two more of these Brahma viharas which are important. One is metta. Metta meaning loving kindness. Loving kindness. This means basically wishing health and happiness for others in the future. Sympathetic joy acknowledges that people have had happiness. Metta hopes that everyone will be happy in the future. It's more future-oriented in that way. It's a very soft sort of emotion. And we get this sort of stereotype that Buddhists should be non-emotional, or that Buddhism is about detachment or something like this. We get these stereotypes of monks. Oh, they meditate, they calm their mind, they still their mind, they lose all their emotions, they ascend to nirvana, something like this. But these were exactly things that the Buddha was telling the monks to practice. That's why we still have these sermons, because the monks preserved it for so long. So he's telling these Buddhists, feel compassion for other people suffering, and feel joy and loving kindness towards others. There's a lot of actual feeling in Buddhism if we don't stereotype it and actually look at what the texts tell us. What's the last one? It's upeksha. This is equanimity. Equanimity. That means accepting the past, basically. The past has been mixed. We accept it with equanimity. And we treat all others equally as well. Equanimity is the idea of everything being equal, not reacting too strongly to the bad or too good, but accepting things and treating all people this way. So this means basically being without discrimination, being open-minded as well. All of these different sort of things are contained within that sense of upeksha. Upeka is the Pali.
What is word for it? Equanimity?
Equanimity is upeksha. U-P-E-K-S-H-A. Upeksha. Upeksha. I believe the Pali is upeka without the S. Should be a double K. U-P-E-K-S-H-A. Upeksha.
Accepting the past.
There's multiple sort of connotations to this. So this includes accepting the past with equanimity. So when we look up to the past, bad things have happened to us and good things have happened to us. But we treat both of them with an evenness, an even-temperedness. And all sorts of people come to us, but we treat them with an evenness as well. We extend compassion, sympathetic joy, and loving kindness to all people, be they good, be they bad, be they like us, be they different from us, etc., etc. So that's contained within these sort of things. You can see they're sort of building on one another and to form a cohesive set that are all tied in with this idea of compassion, right? These are the Brahma Viharas. There's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that I brought along with me to sort of illustrate this here. Thich Nhat Hanh, many of you will have heard of him. He's a contemporary Vietnamese Buddhist teacher, trained primarily within the Vietnamese Zen tradition, but actually that includes a lot of Pure Land and other practices as well. Here's what he has to say about this. It says, quote, "When we come into contact with the other person, our thoughts and actions should express our mind of compassion, even if that person says or does things that are not easy to accept. We practice in this way until we see clearly that our love is not contingent upon the other person being lovable." So this is a Vietnamese Zen master's quote about this idea of equanimity here and how to sort of apply it there. So it's not about whether or not that person seems to deserve it. It's about us bringing it out and bringing it equally to all others in that way. I often think about this particular one, equanimity. It so happens that my homyo, my Dharma name, as we receive in this tradition, it's a Daito. Toll is that equanimity. That's the way we say it. So toll there, Daito, great equanimity. It's something I aspire to. I'm not going to pretend to have even scratched the surface of it. But I rather like that name because it keeps me humble about the fact that I'm not terribly close to it. As I look at our time, we're just a little past 8. I started a little late too, so we're maybe about halfway through. I hope we're all doing just fine. Everybody looks okay. Looks pretty chipper. Okay. But you got to understand my context. I teach university students who stay up way too late, get up too early. They're drinking a lot. They're having massive amounts of caffeine. They're not kind to themselves, let's say, right? They haven't learned these sort of things. Or they're young enough they can get away with these things, unlike the rest of us where it's starting to catch up. So they're always, going like, in class, right? I'd like to think it's not just me and my lectures, because when you look in anybody else's classroom, you see the same thing. It's almost like watching waves on the ocean. Just think of it as a force of nature, and you won't take it personally. Anyways, so I don't see any of that here, so already I'm a little encouraged. We're doing okay. Okay, I want to move on here and talk about some examples of Buddha's compassion, because in Buddhism, of course, the Buddha is the ultimate sort of role model that we have for how to act. We're trying to follow in his footsteps. So the Eightfold Noble Path is a path that we can walk in order to achieve things that bring us closer to the goal of Buddhahood. So I brought along with me a few examples of compassion from the stories around Shakyamuni Buddha. One of them is a story that takes place actually before he became the Buddha, when he was Prince Siddhartha, as a young man in the palace growing up. There's a story about him and his cousin, Devadatta. Many of us may have heard of Devadatta. He's sort of always the bad guy or the fall guy or something in Buddhist stories. He's an actual historical person. He's a cousin of the Buddha, actually. He was always held up in the tradition as being a very jealous sort of guy. It's always like, whatever Devadatta's doing in the story, don't do that. Do what the Buddha's doing instead. So they're very good instructional sort of stories. I feel sort of bad about the guy. He couldn't have been as bad as they always make him out. Well, then again, maybe he could have been. In this story, Devadatta, the young Devadatta and the young Siddhartha are out in the fields, and Devadatta sees a swan flying over, and he shoots it with his bow and arrow. He shoots it, and it falls to the ground. And they both run over to it, but Siddhartha is faster, so he's able to get there first. He gets there first, and he sees that the swan is not dead yet. So he very tenderly takes the arrow out and sort of binds up the wound of the swan. And although it's injured, with care it will survive. Devadatta catches up, he runs up, and he demands to have the swan back. He says, I shot it, it's mine. But Siddhartha says instead, if you had killed it, I would have let you have it. But it's still alive, and I got here first, therefore, it's mine, and I'm going to show it compassion instead. I'm going to help it. So already he's showing compassion for other living beings, even though this doesn't make him popular with his cousin here. He sort of sticks his neck out for this bird in this sort of way. And according to the later stories, this is actually a story that then Devadatta then told this to Yasodhara, who's a young woman, also part of one of the nearby courts. And she heard about this and became very impressed with Siddhartha, and this is what eventually led her to fall in love with him, because she's the one who grew up to become his wife. So it was because of this act of compassion, this manifestation of compassion, actually, that their relationship comes about according to the stories. I thought that was kind of interesting. Even things that may not immediately appear to be about compassion from the Buddha's lifetime are usually actually directly understood to be about compassion. So when the Buddha grows up, he leaves the palace and he goes off in the forest. He leaves his family behind, including Yasodhara, and he goes off to sort of by himself practice and try to become a Buddha. This could sound like a story of lack of compassion. Hey, what's going on? People are upset that he's left. He's giving all this up. He's being selfish. He's going off on his own. What about his wife? What about his kid and everything? But why is the Buddha doing this? He's leaving in order to seek a solution to the suffering of others. In other words, he's there feeling himself with the suffering of everyone in the world, including those people he's left behind, and he wants to do something to relieve them. That's exactly our definition